You may think that every African American involved in the development of the New World was enslaved, but think again.
Although the majority of African Americans in the New World were transported through the Middle Passage and kept as slaves by the colonists, we're here to tell you about the black men who defied discrimination, broke the shackles of slavery, and became conquistadors and key explorers in colonizing and creating the country we live in today.
Not to mention the blacks who achieved their freedom while living in the early American colonies. Juan Garrido was the first black conquistador to join the expeditions to the New World.
Wasn't he the first guy to cultivate wheat in the New World?
Yes, in 1508 he was part of the Spanish force that helped to invade and capture Puerto Rico and Cuba. Later on, he joined Cortez's expedition to Mexico, where they successfully captured the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan. He was rewarded land here, and this land was where he planted the first wheat in the New World. Proof of his participation in the expeditions is found in his petitionary proof of merit to the Spanish general, which mentions his, oh look, it's Cortez! This is Juan Garrido's proof of merit presented to him for his 30 years of service to Spain, for his many conquests to the New World.
Another black Spanish conquistador was Estebanico. At only 10 years old, Estebanico was taken from Azamor, Morocco, and sold into slavery in Spain. He ended up befriending the man he served, Andres de Dorantes, who later brought Estebanico with him on Narvaez's expedition to conquer Florida. He went on to lead expeditions to northern New Mexico to prepare the way for Francisco Coronado. Both of these African American men began as slaves or servants in the Old World and went on to lead expeditions to the Americas and represent their countries. Although they are not commonly known, Estebanico and Juan Garrido truly made a name for their people.
Along with black conquistadors, there were also non-slave African Americans in the colonial world. Some Europeans of African descent traveled freely to the New World. They started out with opportunities to work and make a life for themselves. Early on, settlement social hierarchy was based largely on economic status rather than race. African Americans who had enough money were able to purchase certificates called Cédulas de Gracias al Sacar, or a certificate of thanks to remove. They were said to cleanse people of impure blood and change the status of their race. The certificates would essentially ignore their foreign descent and call them Europeans. Cortez!
Not again.
Anyways, this is the certificate of a man named Juan Herman Rocio Nieves who purchased the certificate that decreed him as only 1/5 of African descent.
But this initial freedom quickly turned to a stark race-based societal divide. Because most of the black population was enslaved, whites began to stereotype African Americans as being inferior and receiving less rights as a result. They were a class of people who whites felt were acceptable to treat as less than human. Because whites began to argue whether equality should really include African Americans, racial profiling in the Americas was born.
The life as a free African American was of course more desirable than life as a slave. However, these citizens were given harsh treatment from whites and were still considered inferior to others.
Still, freedom was the ultimate goal for African American slaves. There were many different ways for a slave to gain their freedom.
One of which was for the slaves to pay for their freedom, but that was very rare, seeing how the slaves had next to no money. Also, if indentured servants completed their contracts, they would be given freedom.
Another way for a slave to achieve freedom was called manumission. This occurred when an owner freed their slaves voluntarily. Manumission was rare, but did happen occasionally.
Even for the African Americans who were free, kidnapping was very common. Slave catchers often abducted free blacks and forced them back into slavery.
You would think that living as a free citizen would easily be a better alternative to slavery, but the unequal treatment of African Americans and the constant fear of being forced back onto the fields was not the ideal life, or even freedom at all.
This unequal treatment and predestined expectations based on race put African Americans at an immediate disadvantage that affected their lives years after the settlements became colonies. The colonies became independent states, and North America broke from England to become the United States of America.
This created a socioeconomic divide of our country that we still see aspects of today.
Over 100 years later, discrimination against African Americans was still a strong institution and was one of the leading factors in spurring the Civil War in the 1800s, the bloodiest war with the most American casualties our nation has ever faced, which ended with the official abolishment of slavery.
But the struggle wasn't over for African Americans yet. Segregation in basic rights such as education, public transport, and public places plagued the country. In the 60s, strong leaders such as Martin Luther King Jr. stepped up to lead the civil rights movement, their final stand in demanding equality for all through campaigns of civil resistance as well as peaceful protests. Unification of people who believed in the cause, including many whites, led to a revolution for equality, which is still being fought today.
African Americans often still face discrimination and injustice in their daily lives, depending on their surroundings and situation. Many lack the same deserved opportunities that the majority of the white population has.
Although the problem has not yet been fully resolved, we've progressed immensely in providing equal rights for all people of all races, and gratefully accepting the contributions African Americans have offered to our society and culture. The ultimate goal is to come to a place where all men are truly created equal, which early Black conquistadors and freemen in the colonies would have approved of.
Thank you for watching our crash course video. This is
Izzy
Izzy and Talia signing off!